All right, so welcome back into the live stream today. We're going to be diving into the Swift ecosystem and maybe how blockchain could be maybe the savior, the nemesis, not quite sure. There's going to be a lot that we'll be breaking down today. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back to TechPath. Let's dive in a little deep. Of course, just as a reminder, make sure and get all your questions in. I know you guys have a lot already. I've already seen some of the stuff. Hey, Paul, what about Algorand? Yes, Algorand should probably be on the list. It is one that I wouldn't necessarily say it's a head-to-head in terms of an alternative, but it definitely is one of those projects that's kind of on the outer ring for sure. So, and we have talked with Algorand a couple of times on the show. Make sure and check out the videos with them. But today's video is going to break down a couple of things. With the world stage as it is, the Swift payment system, I should say, the message system of Swift is not necessarily under fire, but it is definitely at the forefront of how and what it could be utilized for, especially around sanctions, even to a certain essence of being somewhat weaponized by the US because of our control of Swift. And when I say control, meaning our transaction load into Swift equals, I think it's a little over 50% of US dollars that transact through Swift, hence why we have the most control or influence over the Swift system. Just so everybody's clear of what Swift is, and we'll kind of explain this. And just as a reminder, if you're new to our channel, we talk a lot about crypto, but also the underlying technologies that drive Web3. Web3 is kind of the evolution or the next evolution, what I think is going to really become the next internet that you see, we see around all things that we do. If you think about the internet back in the day before you could do credit card transactions, pre-social media, pre-smartphone, all those eras, that's essentially the time frame that we're living in with Web3 right now. And one of the things that is probably the most important to the advancement of crypto and crypto technologies, blockchain technologies, is going to be payment. I want to jump to the Investopedia understanding of what Swift is. So how the Swift system works, it's basically an electronic funds transfer messaging system. So the idea is pretty simple. It's not super complicated, but it does require a lot of, in essence, decentralized in a way, communication and approval, much like nodes do. And there's a lot of banks that are involved in this, but it basically says, hey, I'm going to send you a message. It says I'm sending you $1 billion. Not really sending you $1 billion. I'm giving you a message that qualifies that this value of $1 billion is now and should be allocated in your bank or in your financial institution. So when you look at what they're doing here, the need to transfer money overseas, today it walks into a bank and transfer money wherever around the globe. But how does that happen? This is where Swift comes in. Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Transaction, Swift, is a vast messaging network. So it doesn't really move the money because that's not how money moves today. So a lot there to go into this, but more than 11,000 global Swift members, institutions, sent an average of 42 million messages per day. Some takeaways here that you can kind of look at. It works by assigning each member institution a unique ID. That, of course, comes into it. The Swift transaction itself is really more about ID than anything. Some other aspects around this is, there's one here that I want to kind of focus in on. Let's just, here's the one, the world before Swift. So this gets into kind of the era that when Swift kind of came into power, so to speak. So this is the 1960s. The concept was pretty simple. They were trying to overcome or replace a very outdated telex system. And I kind of think that's a little bit funny because now we're seeing the same potential opportunity with blockchain and Web3 of potentially replacing an outdated system right now with what we're dealing with in terms of Swift. But founded in 1973, 239 banks in 15 countries. By 77, expanded to 518 in 22. In 2022, we have 11,000 institutional members hailing from more than 200 countries. Here's what's interesting to me, is it's more than just the banks right now. So obviously, you can see here in the pink, although there are other messaging services, Fedwire, Ripple, obviously with XRP, clearinghouse, interbanks, which chips, all of that is definitely moving in the right direction. But where it potentially could be, and this is the thing that is interesting, is it's more than banks that use the Swift system. This is also brokerage houses, institutions, different trading houses, security dealers, asset managers, clearinghouses, depositories, etc., exchanges, and so on. And it really gets into a much deeper flow of how money moves around the world. And when I say money moves around the world, it's really messages move around the world that says, okay, money, because most of the time, remember, money is still really digital already. If you try to go in and clear out $100,000 in cash in your bank account from your bank, it's highly unlikely you'd be able to do that unless you have a very unusual relationship with your bank. That's the kind of thing that is dealing. You'd almost have to set an appointment to go in and do a cash transaction and try to withdraw $100,000 because it's all digital. It's basically just numbers that are piling up in a bank, and that's how it's moved. And there is some argument to even when you get into the fiat system that there's only a certain amount of fiat that's even in circulation today that kind of moves in that direction. So how does this move into what we're dealing with right now? And when in times of what we're dealing with right now with global conflict to a certain extent, money always seems to come to the forefront because it's always going to be the one thing that is a scenario that people are saying, well, what if this was done differently? So this article right here, EU cuts Russian banks off from SWIFT, bans RT, which is Russia Today, and Sputnik, which is their media outlets. And I think we'll continue to see more and more movement toward this whole issue with not only the EU, but also in general around SWIFT being a little bit of a tool being used to put a lot of pressure on different countries. Imagine if this was another country that was, for whatever reason, didn't agree with certain aspects, much like China does with the US. Where would that go and how would that apply into the use of SWIFT? And maybe what you're dealing with is where these countries start to kind of develop their own thing. In fact, China and Russia both are already moving in that direction. Right here, Russian central bank claims SWIFT alternative is ready. So the scenario here is that Russia essentially is trying to recreate a SWIFT-like system. The problem is that because SWIFT being still somewhat decentralized and 11,000 members out there, is that it has a lot of, and it's still kind of a almost a DAO in essence. Sure, there is a head, but in most cases, it's dealing with a conglomeration of all the participants that are involved in that. With Russia, what they're talking about, and this is kind of the point that I wanted to make, central banks claimed its alternative SWIFT network is ready. Russian state-controlled media TASS reported that the financial message transfer system of Russia, SPFS, was ready for foreign participation. However, it's unlikely the development will have much of an impact. And the reason is because no one's going to be there to interact within it. So the likelihood now, could Russia and others start to put some pressure on utilization, especially when you think about the gas side of things and how Russia supplies a lot of Eastern and Western Europe with fuel, in terms of how they have to be able to transact, being able to get paid from other countries at some point. And that's in several of the countries that have been able to circumvent the ban or the sanctions within the SWIFT ecosystem to still not to affect that. So I think that is going to be something that continues to move in this direction. So the question will always be, if that is the case, then is there an alternative out there from a decentralized standpoint? Because if you think about what's happening in Canada, you look at now what's happening in the Ukraine and Russia, there's many of these places, and let's not look at the bad, also look at the good side of things where people are trying to just transact that have nothing to do with any of these conflicts or disagreements. They're just going about their day on a regular basis. And in essence, they're being trapped in financial systems that eventually will have a trickle-down effect on this and maybe a global effect from a financial standpoint. So despite fears, here's crypto as no viable alternative to SWIFT for sanctioned Russian banks. So this is the point that a lot of people were making early on, is a lot of people thought, well, Russia's just going to flip around and use crypto instead of SWIFT. And the issue is that the functionality within crypto and just the ability to run a nation state of that size, being the Russian nation state, is almost impossible. And I think they would have had to have been planning this for almost years for something like that to really happen. Here's a note: ever since Russian banks lost access to the global system of financial plumbing, which is SWIFT, lenders used to facilitate cross-border transactions, investors speculate that the pri-state may switch to distributed ledger technology that the same underpin crypto assets conduct their daily business. Now, could they be using and would they be using? Sure, yeah, that's a possibility. But in kind of, Vitalik even kind of states it right here. Let me kind of highlight that for you. Vitalik says, hey, he can attest Russians already crypto savvy in the country, rank 18th in the world in terms of overall adoption. Moreover, very purpose of decentralized finance is to eliminate gatekeepers like governments. Now, what I would be more concerned with is not how this affects Russia now. This is, and I think in general, many nation states around the world are watching very closely as to what the trickle up or trickle down effect might have when all of these things are settled. You start to realize the weaknesses in your system. It's like going to any kind of project development. You always have that after action report. That's what I think we'll see coming out of Eastern Europe is after action reports, whether you're in the Ukraine, Russia, the surrounding states that will be affected by, when I say states, countries that will be affected by this. And I think that's something that many countries are going to start taking a harder look at what if, and being able to prep for that over the years to come. So when that does occur, you're going to be dealing with the countries and also the projects and platforms that essentially will become the next thing. And that's where this article is. Will SWIFT eventually be replaced by blockchain? And what they're talking about, because this is happening really at a level that people don't necessarily realize is all the way down into something that you and I might be doing today. When you pay for goods, you buy, your bank is notified, instructed to ensure that you have the necessary funds and credit the money in recipient's bank. That's all happening through a SWIFT-style exchange. And the potential of this moving into other countries, and when I say other countries, of other countries looking at a crypto adoption or an alternative, it's not, as I said, it's not what is going to happen today because the system isn't in place to be able to monitor and be able to do that. But the potential of people saying, all right, we finally see the light here. We do understand we need to be consistently moving in this direction and really kind of jump to the next issue. So when you look at challenges facing SWIFT, they handle vast amounts of sensitive information. Yeah. Consequently, they've become kind of the target for hackers and other malicious actors, and it's been hitting them. So one notable vector for an attack is the authentication process. This is another factor that's very weak for SWIFT. If a hacker manages to gain access to a bank employee's credential, there's no safeguards. There's really no way to stop them. And the system can essentially be leveraged at that point. And it can even be more straightforward than that. In 2018, junior employees, this was happening at the Punjab National Bank in India, started sending SWIFT messages that weren't recorded on the internal system. And then over several years, their wrongdoing went unnoticed. They ultimately led to a staggering $1.8 billion. That's billion, 1.8 billion. And this was by groups within a bank, inside job, but even lower level employees. So that is something that is already been a big issue with SWIFT in general. The other issue is connectivity. 99% availability assures messages go through, aren't lost when using SWIFT establishing connectivity network with customers' hands. They'll have to invest in a significant amount of resources to create a secure end-to-end interface between their systems and banks. This is the thing that is really kind of the challenge I think that Web3 still faces. But unfortunately, tapping into SWIFT isn't a plug and play for organizations. So this is something that if you look at the leaders and who would be the players, most likely Ripple, XRP is going to be the player that kind of wins the game here. Now, sure, there are some that have some alternatives. We'll break into each one of these just to give you guys an idea. And I want to jump over to a couple of things here. I don't want to go to the traffic. I want to jump over here to Ripple, just to give an example of Ripple's partnerships. I was even surprised at this. I want to go to the Ripple ecosystem. Let me zoom up on this right here. Maybe I'll zoom up on it right there. There we go. All right, so you're going to see type use. Then you're going to get into a lot of areas. This is all education, of course. Then you're going to get into associations that have been linked up here, then investors. Notice the investor group. I'm going to start slowing down here because there's some very big names here. Lightspeed, All Blue Capital, Andreessen, Avant Global, Blockchain Capital, Camp One. You can kind of see these are monster investment groups. Pantera, Pathfinder, Route 66. I mean, there's just so many that are really moving in this. Then you get into the exchanges. Look at these exchanges that are utilizing and or have partnered with XRP and Ripple. It just continuously grows. Brex, which is that's a new payment system out of Austria. Syncreon, another one that's big moving. Chainfront, this is a tech that's starting to roll. And this is the other aspect of where they're talking about evolution. I think we'll see a lot more tech groups really flying into the utilization of Ripple in the future. And then you get into just the plain Jane money transfer businesses, which is right here. Number one, you've got a tech company, Titanium Labs out of Ukraine. Then you got money transfer out of AirWallex out of Australia. Then obviously Amex. And you can just kind of see, many of these are international: Brazil, Canada, Philippines on money transfer, Mexico, UK. I mean, you can see this is something that is in a way already underlying the infrastructure of where this potentially goes. And I think this doesn't necessarily stop there for XRP and Ripple. When you look at Salengic, which is launching its decentralized NFT marketplace on the XRP ledger, this is another aspect of where XRP, especially around, let's just kind of back up for a second and think about NFTs in general, what you could do. Right now you're messaging, you're using Swift as a messaging system. But imagine if you could advance NFT instruments that are more than, Bored Ape Yacht Club and, CryptoPunks. Instead, it is real estate transactions, medical transaction, other financial transactions, bonds, ownership of companies, ownerships of different types of stock equities. All those kinds of things could potentially be tokenized and into the NFT ecosystem. And then we'll need the transferability, which already, as we know, is blockchain, and how that integrates into a national ecosystem for something like a message or a transcription process, to where you can start moving data around, similar to what we've seen in the past with Swift. This is where it gets really interesting with Ripple, and they continue to invest in this. So in Ripple right here, launching their $250 million NFT fund, Creators Bands Marketplace. I think they still see this as a potential for not only just being in the NFT space, but there's most likely a long-term play here of where Ripple could really go. Don't forget, make sure and drop some questions. I know you guys got a ton of questions coming in here. I was just looking at several of them. A lot of good questions coming in. So keep those coming. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Stellar is the other one that we picked out as being a watch for really kind of implementing that. Remember, Stellar is founded by one of the co-founders of XRP Ripple, and essentially kind of split away and, through a difference of opinion on where the project strategy was going. But Stellar, again, open network, storing and moving money, lots of things happening within the Stellar network. And if you look at just their ecosystems right here, MoneyGram, Circle, Flutterwave, I pulled up just their payments application here. You've got Anchor on here, AirTM. These are just all companies that you've probably either recognized, some of which you may not. Dinero in there, which is a cross-border transfer app for North Africa. This is one that's being used heavily in Africa. And then you've got Nabu Bank, that's XLM for remittances, Leaf Global, Liquid Mortgage, another one for potentially moving. It just gets bigger and bigger. And I think this, again, goes back to the point that I'm making, is that we are in the infancy stage, maybe not pre-infancy stage, of where all of this is going. Now, will it be Ripple that wins this? Will it be a Stellar that comes in and kind of saves the day? Or will it be a surprise? Maybe someone like an Algorand or an HBAR that starts to play in this space. And I always look at the strategy, also the technology, but also the partnerships. And that's why I think Stellar and XRP continue to be pretty interesting right here. The other one, of course, is Hedera. Now, Hedera is an interesting blockchain in itself, HBAR. We've had Mance on the show a couple of times, and he's very bullish on the sense of what they're trying to do. The biggest thing about Hedera that I think that probably supersedes this and almost all of these is its ability to handle speed. So 10 times faster than other blockchain alternatives. And the other thing is they have processed, and this is fact out there, they have processed more transactions than anyone in blockchain. So having that capacity of being, I'm the McDonald's of 1 billion served of blockchain is a pretty significant movement this early in the stage. So I think that comes into play as we start to see, again, back to roadmaps being created by smaller countries, bigger countries, maybe countries setting back in here in Eastern Europe saying, we don't want that to happen to us in the future, for whatever way might occur. Forget about just invasion. Let's think of economic sanctions, situations with global pandemics, all those kind of things that could play into this, and be ready for those kind of scenarios. What is the kind of infrastructure we need to be putting in place to be able to avoid those kind of issues? So I think that is going to continue to look and weigh on many of the world leaders going forward. Look at their newest council members. This again is just a line list of people that are going to aid in the development, but also in the adoption of HBAR. And you've got, Boeing in here, Google, IBM, LG. I mean, I look at this and I just think about the number of banks that they're already communicating with. You've got Ubisoft in here. The opportunity here for Hedera to move into a real financial powerhouse is real. And it's one of these projects, again, that I think is just underserved right now. It doesn't really get the kind of due that it should be, just because a lot of people don't really understand it. And I think more importantly, and I would say watch the video because Mance explains a lot about how it works, why the ecosystem is so powerful, and why it matters to be looking at Hedera as a potential alternative. If you go to this Coin Exams, this was an interesting article right here. Hedera versus XRP on the utility. Generally not as good as XRP. However, Hedera's utility is expected to improve. We're better than XRP in the near future. Might explain why it's more popular or less popular than users. The other thing they point out here is both are supported by sovereign wallets. Both win that class. Right here, though, Hedera supports smart contracts. XRP does not, probably will not, at least in the foreseeable future. If they do implement smart contracts, that would change the game quite a bit. But both are fully deployed, which implies they have full functionality. They're not in beta, so they're out there running. And I think this is a big factor that we'll continue to see in the space and be real for how and what they can be utilized for. I want to get your opinions on if you think, let's just, and maybe we'll put it in a poll as other, but I'm kind of curious how the ones that you've got that we've selected, are there ones that you think are going to eventually supplant that? And here's the poll right here. Ripple, of course, winning out. HBAR right beside, well, a ways behind it, 21%, and Stellar at 15. So best alternative still Ripple, kind of hands down. I want to go to a couple things. We're going to get over to a couple of charts just to give you guys. Here was the HBAR transactions. I wanted to bring this up. This was pretty intriguing to this. That's 2 billion transaction, 222 million. I love this. 57 TPS testnets right there, 131,870. This is huge in terms of just the ability. And again, this comes from over from Dr. Baird. I think, believe me, that's the partner to the founder of HBAR on his design. But that in itself, along with this financial post right here, and I wanted to kind of just show you this one. Blockchain is shaking SWIFT and the global financial system. This gets into some areas that are concerning around SWIFT itself. We've talked about the 11,000 members, but the big number right here is this one right here. 1.5 trillion a day is going through. So when you have this much money dispatching through a system, remember, not money moving, but messages that are saying, okay, let's put 100 million over here, 100 million over here. That is and has the potential to see massive disruption. And I think that's the big issue that we'll continue to see. This was an interesting point right here. The key thing to understand about platforms such as the Ambitious, this is an alternative to SWIFT. This is JP Morgan's Onyx Link system, is that they're a closed loop. That's with the JP Morgans. As opposed to SWIFT's open system, rivals thus having the incentive to collaborate with SWIFT to promote interoperability. Fintech is a world of frenemies, so to speak. So that kind of gets to the point that if SWIFT was in such a perfect condition, why would companies and projects like JP Morgan and others be developing their own ecosystem, China and Russia building their own alternative? The key is that SWIFT has had a cumulative control assigned to mostly Western nation states, and I think a lot of the rest of the world is starting to look at that is it's too much power, especially when it comes to moving financial assets around the planet. So I think that's a big factor. If you look at some of the other points here, it's 4 years ago, it introduced one big upgrade, new global payments innovation to improve the process. Recent announcement in partnership with banks is supposed to deliver more digital capabilities. This is in November of last year. And then they had a 15-month plan that looks achingly slow to anyone in Silicon Valley or in Beijing, which is racing ahead with its digital currency. Swift's ambition also seems modest compared to the promise of blockchain. So the issue being fought right now in Brussels is not just one of the technical and geopolitical importance, but must cross-border payments occur via messages? Should America weaponize dollar flows? This goes back to the point we're making. And the fact that the answers are uncertain and very unnerving are really kind of what puts this at the forefront. And back to my point here for the whole video is that we're talking about a time in which the roadmaps for the next decade are being laid today. When you drive in war, pandemic, infrastructures, and kind of a shift within the budgets, inflations, and scenarios of that are happening, digital yuan starts to take place. There's too many factors that are starting to play into a very different future from the financial standpoint around the globe. And of course, you know us, we are big proponents as to why crypto and in general blockchain will be the savior of that system. Free the money, free the world. All right, let's get into a couple of things I want to show you guys just where XRP is going during all this. Sliding, of course, right down here. Remember, XRP right here on December 24th had clipped in at about $1. Nice little move, even though it had fell from its high of around $1.40. Went down. We continued to see this fall right here, and of course, right here, late January to early February. Then we saw the pump on XRP. Went a little flat right here. Stayed pretty solid at a 74.96. Amplification was not doing well. And we saw a little bit of this downward trend on amplification. Remember, the way our sentiment data works is we score two key areas. One is sentiment, the other is amplification. Amplification gives us a little bit of a forward-leaning or forward-looking data point that when we see amplification significantly under sentiment, not marking well, then it usually indicates downward trends. If we see amplification moving above sentiment scores, it usually marks an indicator that we're going to see some uptick. So an example would be this one right here. So we pull XRP right here on February 27th. Sentiment held in at 75.95, which was an increase over the previous week. And it should have been because we're starting to see a little bit of movement right here. And then AMP scores came in at 75.03. So very close right now. And when you get very tight like that, again, this is where it gets interesting, because that's when you have an opportunity on a project like XRP to see a little bit of a bump right there. And I just want to kind of show you a tweet by Jeremy Hogan here. Let me zoom up on that one, because this is interesting. This way, he just put this out the other day. Yes, 1 hour settlement discussion happened a couple of months ago. It didn't settle, which means its next most likely settlement would be at mediation, see below, and which will be hosted by the one and only Judge Netburn. Now, Judge Netburn is the presiding judge over the SEC and Ripple case. And guess what? This arbitration would mean that Judge Netburn, if she in fact is the arbitrator of that next meeting, she's seen all the documents. Everything's out in the open. So in that scenario, it's not going to be a situation where someone may not have all the information or all the facts. She is in fact going to be in that position. So we could be very close to a settlement. Now, if that happens with everything else that's happening on the global stage, now you've got a different game in the XRP camp for sure. Just to show you a little bit around where the top 20 are holding. This again is our CPI score. Oh, by the way, I want to show you guys a new feature on CPI, because we just added this today. It is our V1.1. You're going to see a new button right here. It's this one right here. It's the Altcoin Sentiment. Now, what we've been doing is giving you the overall on sentiment against the different categories. So you've got, overall sentiment, 12-week run against Bitcoin, against ETH. Here's the altcoins. Here's Metaverse. Here's DeFi. And then we break each individual one out. Okay, so that's great, and it's been excellent. But the request from everybody has been, we want more tokens like this with more historical data, because we've been only doing Bitcoin and Ethereum. So what we did was we added this section right here to top altcoin sentiment. Now this is going to give you a breakdown of the top 10 by market cap. Let me zoom in on this one right here. So there's BNB historical, Ripple right here. So I want you to see this on Ripple's performance right here. Overall sentiment, this is the hard line, white. And right there is Ripple. And let me kind of pull it right there. So you can kind of see where overall is, where Ripple is starting to fly. So this right here gives me a lot of upside sentiment-wise for what Ripple could be. Of course, we have Solana in here now, Luna's in here, Avalanche is in here, Cardano is in here, and then Polkadot, and then Polygon. So lots happening here. We are going to be adding more like this into the CPI. These will drop every Monday, and then our top 20, which we're staying with 3 top 20 rankings, which is Metaverse, top 20 alts, and then gaming sectors will be done. We are going to be doing more of this in the CPI around the gaming sector, and Metaverse, so be watching, because this, of course, being the altcoin by market cap, you'll see gaming and Metaverse by market cap that will blend into this, so you'll have another tab coming soon on V.2, so make sure and check those out. Lots happening out there for sure, guys. Just as a reminder to end on a good note before we get into questions, here's DeVere Group predicting Bitcoin will reach 50K before the month end. This is March. And we'll go back to my bullish sentiment back in January of saying Bitcoin will hit 52K. And I was pointing at late February. Maybe that moves into March. We'll see who's right on that one. All right, let's get into it. Kingsley, questions here. XLM, XRP, a buy at these prices. I still think XRP has been a buy all along because it's so suppressed. Obviously, I would have rather be purchasing it. Again, no financial advice here, but how I would approach it is I would have wanted to buy it later, but I do dollar cost average and have acquired XRP. I've actually done a little bit more of that. All crypto basically centralized. If the exchanges has KYC, it's centralized. That is true. UP or UGP blogs. So you know what? Use decentralized wallets. Use DEXs. Use different formats enabled to control your coin. Not your keys, not your coins. So use that if you are sophisticated enough to where you can start using hardware wallets or cold storage, those kind of things. I always recommend that anyway, just in the sense that if you think about all the things that have been happening, imagine if you had that on cold wallet and in a country that you could not get to an exchange. Those are factors, especially in trying to move fiat into an exchange. That's where things can get a little risky. So just be aware. Tyler Fitz, okay, plus Paul, majority of banks do not even have that much fiat in their disposal. We talked about that earlier in the episode. That's why Bitcoin is the answer. Fiat depreciating, whereas Bitcoin is appreciating. Totally, you and me are on the same page, Tyler. 7 to 10%. That's of what we know is deflating in our fiat dollars. That's of what we know. And if you're doing anything, even if you're just parking money over in just traditional stable coins and then putting those into these high yield centers, I know you don't have the keys to it, but it is a high yield center. If you're going to keep it in a bank, why not keep it in a stable coin and earn some real yields on it, whether it's 5%, 6%, or some of the big ones around 10%. So a lot happening. Do you think Russia-Ukraine situation is good or bad for XRP? I don't think this really affects XRP. It probably shines a light on SWIFT, which then automatically shines a light on XRP because people understand what SWIFT is, and then you find out, oh, there's a new blockchain, Web3 tool that could replace SWIFT the next, 4 or 5 decades before we see AI take over. That's a real big opportunity there, and I think that is probably the positive side of that, but then again, you have the downside of the SEC case itself. So HBAR Metaverse, right on. You are definitely going in the right direction there, Shannon. Again, more and more of these big layer ones and some of these big projects, especially through partnerships, good deal in terms of being able to go into the metaverse and make some real money moves. Money bags, it doesn't take tech only, replaces SWIFT. You must have the partnerships or nothing happens. It takes years to acquire partnerships in the rails. I would agree there in the sense that we are going to see partnerships be a big factor here. But remember, XRP Ripple has been building those partnerships for really about 5-6 years and been doing a good job on it and been able to really leverage in. And I don't think we've seen everybody knows we have not seen critical adoption. When we see critical mass adoption, man, that's when it's going to get really interesting fast. All right, do you see SEC selling the case before year end? Yes. I think the SEC is slowing down Ripple so Swift can develop a new system. I think that would take too long. Swift, unless Swift has just got some kind of evil genius back there behind the curtain that is figuring out this stuff, I just don't know. You're talking about, no, that's Godzilla moving at a snail's pace. Sure, it can throw a lot of fire, but it cannot make money moves fast, and that's where Ripple and others can be. SEC, okay, here we go. How safe are Swift alternatives compared to layer 2s from an investment standpoint? I don't know. From an investment standpoint, layer 2s, layer 1, here's my thesis right now, currently in the current state of the condition of the market, and that is I still stay on the layer 1s and stablecoin. I keep a lot of dry powder because I'm looking for that pump in the altcoins. Remember, some altcoins will not come back. There are many of those that will not return when we see a bear market truly come in. But there will be a lot of these secondary altcoins that are projects, especially utility driven, just like we talked about on our channel many times, Helium, or others like it, utilities, renders, anything that's a utility aspect to Web3, those are safe. So if maybe that's the area, is you look at your blue chips, which are your top 10, you look at your up and coming utility tokens, and you look at your stability stablecoin tokens, and that's kind of your array. If you're really a degen and you want to start moving into gaming and metaverse, there's some wins there too, because you've got Axie and Sand and those kind of things at play. And there's some winners on the outside. For me, it's still high risk portfolio, 10%. Some people look at that and say that should be maybe 2 or 3%, and I'm fine with that. Again, not investment advice, but that's kind of how I play it. All right, let's see here. Daniel Castro, I don't think any of them can handle the global load of traffic. That's a possibility. When you really stress the system, nobody knows. But if I'm going to bet on next gen Web3 of being able to amp up quick enough, or old gen Web 2, I'll take Web 3 anytime. All right, we're going to get in deep on these a lot more in the week. We'll continue to try to drop some more great content for you guys. We do have a lot happening, and we'll continue to watch Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is definitely on the global stage right now, because it is a potential alternative for stores of value. And I think it's going to show up in the charts, especially if we continue to see Bitcoin fly up. If you guys want to make sure and stay tuned in here with all of what's happening on the channel and on the network, join the Diamond Circle, get involved. That's where we drop our emails, a lot of our communications. It's also where we give away some good digital assets back to our community. If you want to reach me, it's out on Twitter, @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.